Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Esther. Thank you. I see that. I'm glad you now have a better understanding of the peace movement and the opening principles. Um, I'm sure moving forward you'll be able to use this knowledge in your games. So thank you. So others, we can also put in our comments as we progress. So let's dive into today's work. So what we have today is about strategy and planning. So normally we have an understanding of pieces, and we know how they move. We have an understanding of the first, um, at least the first 10 moves of the game based on the different opening you are using. We know you have an understanding of how you move them. You also know some tactics that we've talked about. But tonight we are going to talk about something of the most important thinking skills in chess, how to plan. So before every of your single move, you need to ask yourself three questions as a chess player. One of the questions is that what is my opponent threatening? So basically you need to ask yourself before you make your move, is my opponent threatening any of my pieces? So most times a lot of player they tell you that, oh, I have a plan. I'm about to start a game, so I have something I want to do. Um and okay, Emmanuel, I see your message. I have zero number. Thank you very, very much, Emmanuel. I'm really glad with this. I'm glad the uh, training and this program has been able to introduce you to chess, and you have like a very solid foundation already. I know definitely you'll be able to build on this foundation, and then the sky is the limit. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So as I was saying, a lot of players just start their game, and what they just say is, "Oh, I have a plan in mind. I'm going to do this, do this, do this, do this." But what they don't put in mind is that they are not the only one in the game. So it's just like you being in a very noisy environment, and you tell yourself that you want to read. While this is possible to an extent, you to get to a point that you get distracted by this noise or whatever it is you want to do, you get distracted. So this is the case with chess as well. Your plans are very, very solid, they are beautiful, they are nice, you've thought them through. But the issue there is that your opponent is also having something in mind. So in order for you to succeed in your own plans, you need to consider your opponent's plans as well. So that at any point in time, whatever your opponent has planned will not affect your own plan. So basically, you are not looking at what your opponents have in mind because you want to, or you like your opponent, or you just care about what they move, but because whatever they do affects you, so you need to consider them. Thank you very much, Larry Oluwa. I see your comment as well. Um, okay, trying to load it. I don't know why it's taking forever to load. Okay, let me check that again. All right, I have always seen just as very for game to Yeah, thank you very much, Liliwa, for this detailed comment. Thank you. I'm really glad you've been able to know more about chess, and I know moving forward, this knowledge will be helpful. Thank you. Yes. So you need to ask yourself, one of the three questions you need to ask yourself is, what is my opponent threatening? And then if I do nothing, what happens next? So if I do nothing to what my opponent is threatening, what is going to happen in the next move? And then the second question is, what is my plan in this position? So before you make your move, you have to ask yourself, what is your plan? And then thirdly, you ask yourself, does my intended move help that plan? Does it help the plan? Does it stop the threat that my opponent is, or whatever my opponent is threatening? And does it improve my worst pieces or my worst piece? So basically, these three questions are very important whenever you are playing your game of chess. The first one is, what is my opponent threatening? The second one is, what is my plan in this position? And lastly, does the move I want to make, does it help with this plan? The plan that I want in that position, does it help that plan? Does it stop what my opponent is threatening? Or it improves my piece that is like in a very bad position or in the worst position possible? So these three questions are very, very important before you make your move. So as a beginner, one of the things you want to do for yourself is you want to take your time to make before you make every single move. In fact, if possible, you can use as much as 30 minutes on a single move thinking about and asking yourself these questions in your head. While you want to do this, before you know it, as time goes on, it becomes part of you. And immediately you open a chess game, you don't even need to think for long. And then these questions will just come naturally. But over time, it requires practice before you make any of your moves. A lot of beginners skip this question. They skip one or two of these questions, or sometimes they skip all of the questions entirely. They just look at what they think is the best thing or what looks good in the moment, and then they just play. But every strong players will ask themselves these questions. So there are important strategies that are or strategic concepts that we need to talk about. One of those concepts is the piece activity. One of the concepts is the piece activity. So when we talk about piece activity, we are talking about how active a piece is on the board. So an active piece controls many squares and participates in the game, while a passive piece blocked or is blocked, is in the corner, or is not doing anything. It's just like a wasted soldier or an injured soldier in a war. They are not able to do much. So after every few moves, you have to look at all of your pieces and ask yourself which of these pieces is the worst or is in a worse position. And the only way to know that is by the piece activity. And then after asking yourself which one is in the worst position, you then ask yourself, how do I improve it? So the answer to that question is usually your plan. So basically, we talked about starting a game. You have an opening position, so you are starting a game. Both you and your opponent are playing properly. And as the game progresses, you are able to do a lot of things on the board. And then the game goes on like this. At this point, this is a typical example of thinking before making your move. Now, the question you ask yourself in this kind of position is, what is my opponent threatening? The first question that we talked about. And then the second one is, what is my plan? But when you want to look at what is actually your plan, you need to talk about this piece activity. When you look at the board now, you look at, is there any of your pieces that is in a worst position, and how can you improve it? Now let's look at all of the board. Most times a piece is in a bad position or a piece is a worst piece when it is either not doing anything or it is being attacked. If we look at this position now, we can see that this pawn is, by your opponent pushing this pawn, is threatening to what? To capture the pawn and the bishop here that is on g5. Now you ask yourself that which of my piece is worst? In this situation, when we look at all of this board, almost all of your pieces are either protected by one thing or the other, and none of them is being attacked. Even the one being attacked are well protected. The only one that is being attacked here, even though it is protected, but you can't afford to lose your bishop to a pawn, is this bishop here. So now you ask yourself that, can I improve it? And whatever response you get is your plan. In this case now, your plan is to keep this bishop safe and put it on a very safe square. Whether you decide to move it back to prevent this pawn from capturing it, or you decide to capture this knight with the bishop, whatever it is you decide is your plan. So you have to look at all of your piece activity and be sure that you want to what improve on them. The same thing is going to go for black. Black is going to look at this position now, and then they will ask themselves that how can they improve this position. One of the things that they can do is this bishop here. Bishops, we know, move diagonally. Bishops move diagonally. While this bishop is not active at all because it is blocked by this pawn. And now black is going to ask themselves the question that how can they improve on their position? What is their plan? And is there any of their piece that is in a bad position? A very good one is this bishop here. So if black decide to push this pawn forward to create a path for this bishop, this is a very good plan. And pushing this pawn is going to be the plan of black. That is enough of a plan for you in order for you to be able to bring out your bishop. So for every game, you must look at your piece activity. Know how, already you know how your pieces move. So you should know their activity. You know if anyone is blocked. This bishop here is not able to do anything because it is blocked. Compare it with this bishop that is actively controlling a lot of squares. Another one for white, after probably black plays this in order to bring out their bishop, is to also look at their pieces as well. This bishop is well developed, but look at this knight. It is still where you arrange the board. And when the knight, we talked about the knight being at the edge of the board, which is not very good because it controls limited squares compared to when it is at the center or a square inside the board. So now it will be really nice if you can develop your knight to c3, where it can now control more squares compared to when it was on b1. So this now, bringing out your knight, is also a plan for you because it has helped you what? Improve your worst piece, which is this knight here. So that is another thing. And then another concept, another strategic concept we'll talk about is your pawn structure. Pawns are one of the most underrated pieces on the board. And you cannot afford to have this mindset as well. Your pawns are very powerful, at least if you're able to promote them. Pawns cannot move backward. Every pawn move permanently changes the game. So because of this reason, you have to take note of what we call the pawn structure. Pawn structure basically is just like the shape of your pawn. They determine a lot. If you look at a very strong chess player, one of the things they look at is the structure of your pawn. When they look at, even if they did not start the game with you, they didn't know how you open up and everything. By merely looking at the structure of your pawn, they can tell the kind of opening that you have used. That is to show you how pawn structure is very, very important. And because pawns only go forward, unlike other pieces, look at how I've developed my knight to c3. I can decide in my next move that I still want to move this knight and I bring it back to b1. That is not like the pawn. If you have pushed your pawn forward, it cannot come back. It's irreversible. It's just like a broken egg. So you have to be careful of you pushing your pawn as much as possible. You don't want to just keep pushing your pawn because you know that when you have pushed that pawn forward, it is impossible for you to bring it back. Please give me a second. I want to add someone. Someone is trying to join the call. Okay. All right. So you have to be careful how you push your pawn forward, and if you actually want to push it forward or you want to exchange it, because moving it forward you can't bring it backward. So you have to there's something we call a passed pawn. We are going to talk about three pawn structures. One of them is a passed pawn. A passed pawn is a pawn that has no enemy blocking its path to promotion. So basically, all of these pawns here have enemies in front of it. And when we are talking about enemy, we are talking about the opponent's pawns and their other pieces as well. So when you look at all of these pieces now, they are all having pieces in front of them. So they are not pass pawn. So let me give us a typical example of a pass pawn. So let's take a look at something like this. Let's say we have a pawn here, for example, and then there are other pawns on the board. But fortunately for this pawn that is on d5, the pawn does not have any pawn here, any opponent's pawn on this any of this adjacent side. So it is free for this pawn to promote and get to the end of the board where it becomes a queen. So you want to try as much as possible whenever you have a pass pawn, when you see that there's no opponent's pawn here, there's no opponent's pawn here, or any opponent's pieces at that. So you quickly try to push that pass pawn forward and quickly get it to become a queen, so that your queen will be more, it will be like it is one of the like it is the most powerful piece on the board, and then you can use it to your advantage. So whenever you have a pass pawn, you do what? You advance it and quickly what? Promote it to a queen. Compare it to when you have a pawn here or you have a pawn here. It is difficult to promote this one because when you push it, your opponent captures it. So most times pass pawn is an advantage is an advantage you want to what? You want to use, because you have it and there's nothing blocking your path. Or you compare it to when you have a rook here, it becomes difficult to promote because the rook will what? Eventually capture it. So that is a typical example of a pass pawn. And when you see that it is a pass pawn that there's nothing blocking it, you do what? You push it forward till you get to the end of the board and then you promote it. The second one we are going to talk about is doubled pawn. A double pawn is being on the same two of your pawn being on the same file. So one of the typical example of a double pawn is let me quickly show us. I was showing us a particular game. Most times when you play a game like this and then you play something like this, so let's say we have a game like this. So normally it's black's turn to play and black plays something like this. And white decided, see, this is a pin here and this knight is not able to move. We talked about pin in our last session. So this knight is not able to move, and then you can capture the knight and this pawn captures back. This is an example of a double pawn for black. So this double pawn now, they are on the same file, and most times double pawns are bad and they are weak. The reason being that these pawns here, the one at the back is being blocked by the one at the front. So it is only when the one at the front moves that you get to move the one at the back. So it's like a disadvantage for you. So you try as much as possible to avoid a double pawn. One of the things black could have done here is to bring out their bishop to unpin the knight. So when this bishop takes the knight, you take back with your bishop. And now you don't get to have a double pawn because you won't capture the knight with your other pawn. Because double pawns are weak, you try as much as possible not to have them. Or if eventually you have a double pawn, what you can do is you try to eventually push it forward so that you can exchange it off. So when you exchange it off, you now have just a single pawn that you can push forward. So you have to fix your double pawn. Another one we talk about is an isolated pawn. So an isolated pawn is a pawn with no friendly pawns on any of the adjacent files. So when we are talking about isolated pawn, I showed us a particular pawn the other time. Um, Pawns need support, because when you are pushing it forward and it gets captured, you want to have something you capture back with. so that you can keep promoting it till it gets to the end of, or you can keep advancing it till it gets to the end of the board. But sometimes you usually have a lonely pawn like this that doesn't have any friendly pawn to protect it. So it becomes difficult for you to push it forward, because as you are pushing it forward, there is nothing there that is going to like protect it or support it. This pawn here is also an isolated pawn, or not necessarily an isolated pawn, because later on you can still push the pawn. Let's say you move this knight away. Maybe we have something like this. You move this knight away. You can, and there's an attack like this on this pawn. You can push this pawn forward to support it. So this pawn here that is on e4 is not isolated, because there is this pawn here you can push to support it. And when it is taken, you get to take back. So the reason why a pawn is not isolated is because there is a friendly pawn that you can push either at this right hand side or this left hand side that can get to support the pawn. But in a case where you don't have any of that, just like the pawn on c3, then this pawn on c3 is called an isolated pawn. So most times your opponent targets your isolated pawn because they know that they are not defended by any pawn. So most times you usually get to defend an isolated pawn by any of your pieces. Maybe a queen, a knight, putting a knight, or a bishop. And that makes that piece inactive. Because when you are defending a pawn with a bigger piece, this is like an issue most times. So you try as much as possible to protect the pawn, but not at the expense of making other pieces inactive. So again, you want to avoid an isolated pawn, and if possible, you want to trade it for maybe a pawn or anything bigger. So another thing we'll talk about is open files. Open files. So most times, whenever we start our game, we usually have our opening. Let's say we want to use the Italian. We have our opening, something like this, and then there's castling. So immediately I play my rook to e1. And the reason I play my rook to e1 is because of what we call an open file. So basically, an open file is a file with no pawns on it. Basically, your own pawn, not your opponent's pawn. Although you still have a pawn here, but if we eventually get something like this and we capture like this file becomes open. And whenever you have an open file, you want to occupy it with either your rooks or your queen. Most of the time, it is where your rooks belong. So if you have an open file, immediately you put your rook there so that it will be controlling that file. If you are controlling an open file in a particular position, you are controlling the entire game. So you want to always look for an open file whenever you have exchanged pawns and you move your rook to that particular file. Wherever your rook is, you bring it around and then put it on that file. So sometimes some players do something like this. Let's say they were not able to castle, for example. They play a move like this, bring out their rook, and then bring it out here. So when they put their rook here, you see now that the rook is not at the back anymore. So it is now in front of the pawn. Then this file becomes an open file. So some players do that, and then they can control an open file, not from the end here, not from the last rank, but from this sixth rank here, and then they are still controlling an open file. That is also possible. That is also a strategy you can also exploit. So another thing is, let's talk about which is the last one. We have the outpost. We call something an outpost. An outpost is a particular square that your opponents cannot attack with their pawn. It is square that your opponents cannot attack with their pawn. So most times, this is usually the case when you have probably like exchanged almost all pieces of the board. Like you've exchanged almost all your pieces of the board. And then let's say, yes, let's say we have this, we've exchanged this like this, and then maybe something like this. So this particular square now can be considered an outpost, or this one here can be considered an outpost, and it is a square that you might want to put your knight. So let's say you might want to develop your knight here and bring it here, although it can get captured by this and then you have your pawn to take back, or here, although it can still be attacked. Just take for example that these two pawns are not here, then this is a very perfect outpost for your knight. So you just maneuver your knight around and then put it here, or you find a way to maneuver this other knight here and then put it here. So an outpost is a square that cannot be easily attacked by your opponent's pawn. If this pawn is gone, for example, then this is a perfect outpost, and this is also a perfect outpost. So when you place your knight on an outpost, it is like, you know, a very powerful and impossible piece to remove. And in fact, it is always like a danger to your opponent. It is also, and when you see your opponent pushing their pawns forward, like when you see a player that is a beginner, they don't follow, most times they don't follow the principles, the opening principles. So they push their pawn forward. And because you are familiar with the idea that a pawn push forward cannot move back, what you can just do is that you maneuver your knight around those pawns and then place it on a very good outpost. And then it becomes a bone in their neck. It will be controlling a lot of squares, and it will even make it difficult for them to bring out their pieces. And even their queen will be attacked. Almost all of their pieces will be attacked. And fortunately for you, they have pushed their pawn forward. So the pawns are now in front of the knight. You just maneuver your knight around, make sure they are on a safe square before you get it to the outpost. So whenever you try to find an outpost on a game, you put your piece there. Most times, a very strong outpost are usually this d5 and e5 square. So you want to put your knight on this outpost. Most times the opponent has pushed their pawn to maybe c5, and then this other pawn to it has been pushed to e5. You just place your knight there, and probably you bring your bishop here to take this knight. Your knight is sitting strong on d5 or e5 sometimes. So you want to occupy your knight with the outpost. So finally, let's talk about how to form a plan. So most times we've talked about a whole lot of things now when it comes to strategy. We've mentioned some strategic concepts. So what you want to do is that you want to look at your pawn structure. Where are your pawns pointing to? You see that side of the board is where you should be attacking. Wherever your pawns are pointing should be where you should be attacking. And then you try to look at your opponent's weaknesses as well. We talked about some things that are weaknesses here. We talked about isolated pawns, they are weaknesses. We talked about double pawn, they are also weaknesses. You also look for weak squares. Your opponents that have pushed their pawn forward create a very good outpost for you. So you put your knight there. Look for open files as well. You put your rook there. And then you try to look for your opponent's unprotected pieces that you will attack. So most times when you win a game, it is not because you are playing best. It is just that you are prying, or you are preying on your opponent's weaknesses. So the aim is that every move is targeted at your opponent's weakness. So when you a bad plan consistently followed is better than no plan at all. So whenever you are starting your game, you must have a plan. You have something you want to do. And this is what chess rewards. So how much time do we have? I don't know if I can quickly go through a live game where I can show you how you can put off a plan, and you try to tell me what you would do or your idea in the chat. You said what? Hello, what did you say? Okay, okay, yes. So I've started a live game now. Yes. I'll be checking the comments. Let's also put what you think we can play in any position. Okay, my opponent did not make any move, so I'm just going to. So the first few moves, I'm not going to ask anything because I'm just going to follow the opening principles in the first few moves. But when we get to the middle game, um, when we get to the middle game, that is where the whole thing begins. Italian opening, Castle Delhi. So most times this is usually where the question of what am I going to do next? I don't know what to do next comes in. So what do you think I can do now based on um, the question? So remember to always ask the question, what is my opponent threatening? And then what is my plan in this position? So whatever you have in mind to play, whatever move you have in mind to play, does it help your plan or does it improve a worst position or a worst piece? So I believe this bishop should be controlling mount squares. I think I'm going to put it here. So what do you think I can do? Now I want to push this pawn forward. And the reason being that this pawn is protected, this square that I'm going to is protected by two pieces, the knight and this pawn. Okay. Here. You mean this square? Okay. Why? What's your reason? Okay. Did you react? Okay. So let's see what our opponent does. So I clicked on a wrong game. And the time is not enough to do that. So I'm just going to allow my opponent to win this so I can, or let me just resign. Sorry. So I can select a better one that is going to that is going to there's going to be enough time to think. So I will advise us whenever we are playing a game, don't let us go for this 3 plus 0. So basically when we see 3 plus 0, it means just 3 minutes. And that's very fast of a game. And when you see 5 plus 3, it means like 5 minutes and then 3 seconds extra. So when you make your move, they are going to add 3 seconds to it. So we can go for games from 15 minutes upward. So I would suggest 30 minutes if you want to play a game because this gives you ample time to think. And as a beginner, you really need to think on every of your moves before making them. And then Yeah. So I've been paired with someone right now. I guess we can do this for about 10 minutes while the so again this is just like the usual. So one thing I know is that my opponent has done something bad. We mentioned that a knight should not be at the edge of the board because it is less active there. And this is one thing my opponent has done. So I might want to probably exploit this and take advantage of my opponent placing their knights at the edge of the board. And how am I going to do that? Can anybody tell me how they think I can actually exploit on this knight here? So this is what I'm thinking right now. I'm thinking of pushing this pawn. So when I push this pawn, it creates a path for my bishop. And when I use my bishop to take this knight, the only thing they can do is to take back with the pawn. And when they take back with the pawn, they have what we call the double pawn that we talked about, and which is good for me. We mentioned that double pawns are weak because the second pawn, my opponent is giving me time. The second pawn is not very active. They are not able to push it forward. So I've created a problem, a weakness for my opponent based on their own mistake. And then since they didn't move it, I'm just going to do it. But at the same time, if you were black, one advantage that has been created here for black is this file here, which we call an open file. And we talked about the fact that whenever you have an open file, you should always occupy your rook on the open file. You understand? And because they have exchanged this pawn away, their rook should be here. But again, they have to be careful because of this bishop. Okay. So what do we think is going on? My opponent just played d5 now. What is my opponent threatening? Yes, this pawn here. Okay, to take back. Okay, all right. Okay, okay. To do what? Someone said check the king to play it here. Okay, okay, nice. So what can we do here? Okay. So what else can we do? Okay. This one. forward in front of the queen. No, no, give me a square. We talked about the names of all of these squares. So that's how we talk in chess. So you give me the names of the square. Knight to where? Oh, you can't see it. All right. So okay, this square, right? Is it this one I'm pointing to? Four. Okay. D4. This is D4. Okay. Do you think this square is safe? Okay. You are going to capture it immediately. Or is it not this place you were talking about? D4. Oh. Oh. H4. Is it this point? Are you seeing my screen? Yeah, we talked about not putting your knight at the edge of the board though. For the meantime. Okay, so what should we do there? What should we do now? I put it there, yeah. I thought that was it. Yeah, we can go back, we can go back. But your opponent just played something now. Do you think they are threatening something else? Yeah, they are attacking the bishop. Okay. So, does anybody have an idea of how we can save these two pieces now? Because we have two attacks already now. We already made the mistake. I think it was, I thought you were saying knight to d4. I didn't know you were saying here. So we have a mistake of this already. So two weaknesses here, and then there's an attack here. What do we think we can use to save both of them right now? Anybody has a very great idea? Hmm. Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, that is a very nice idea. You take this. So when they take back, it gives you an opportunity to save the second one. Mm, beautiful. Who is that? Is that Emmanuel? All right. Okay. It seems you really like this square. Hmm. Okay. 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 You mean here? All right. Let me check. Okay. Okay. You mean this? Okay. Do you think there's a better move though? The first move that comes to your mind is not necessarily the best. So you have to actually think. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to do this. Okay. Hmm. He played the rook, yeah. Okay, rook, yeah. He did blocked. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the reason he cannot do that, yes, is this. All right. So we don't have a lot of time to complete this game. But I want to say this, all right, before we end the session. I need to share this with everyone. So it's been an amazing 4 weeks or a month so far on this program. And then um I just want to tell us that the group is not going anywhere. We now have like a permanent chess community. We are going to be having monthly sessions for everyone who wants to keep growing in the chess game. This is special for everyone that wants to learn more, advanced session, and then we go deeper into the whole thing about chess. And we announce everything in the group. And for those who also want a personal coaching, I coach people personally. And then you know, you know what exactly I teach and how I go about it. And I also want to say this before we close. You've done very well. You showed up for like 4 weeks. Congratulations to everyone. This is not easy. It's discipline, doing a work over and over, asking questions, and having a mindset to become someone great in chess. I'm proud of everybody. The game does not end tonight. Please let's keep the group active. It is just the beginning. And as we grow in the chess community, let's always remember the RD Chess Hub. And as much as possible, I would really love to see everyone's growth as we develop in the game. Okay. So I don't know if the time permits or if we'll be able to continue this game because I've gotten like a warning that the session is also ending. But I think we can always continue on the group. Everyone that has played a game, you can tag me. I will come watch your game. Or I'll also get a list of everyone's lichess handle so we can. Hello? Hello? Yeah, remember. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not done now. Well, if you call it. Yeah, the meeting just ended. I was. Kill us,